Hi, thanks for checking out the channel. In this video I'm going to show you how to add a designer radiator to an existing central heating system. Okay, so you've decided to add a new central heating radiator to your existing central heating system. Now your first priority really is making sure that you can actually get the pipework to where your new radiator is going to be situated. So we're quite fortunate here that the floor is actually suspended, so routing any new pipework should be fairly straightforward as long as we can actually access the existing central heating flow and return. So I actually installed the central heating system at this property, so I'm quite fortunate. I know where the flow and return runs. So after you've decided where you want your radiator and you've made the assumption that you can get the pipework into the correct location, your next step is to work out where the existing flow and return is. So quite often when people install new central heating radiators, they try and steal the feed from an already piped up existing radiator. Now that can sometimes be okay as long as that feed is only feeding one other radiator. So my rule of thumb is if you've got two rads running off 15mm, you definitely don't want to be stealing that 15mm flow and return feed and adding an extra radiator. So two radiators usually work fine off of 15mm, but three I wouldn't advise it, and you might get a balancing issue. So because I've actually installed this central heating previously, which I'll add a link to at the end of this video, I know that my existing flow and return are here, so pre-insulated, ready to go, and my new radiator is actually going on the other side of this wall. So all I really need to do is tee off my existing 22mm main flow and returns and pop a hole through this wall, and then I'll be close to the radiator location. So when you are adding a new radiator to your central heating systems, it may be in your property that you're running more than one zone. So you may have an upstairs zone, a downstairs zone. What you'll need to do is identify the correct flow and return. You can do this by running your central heating on the zone that you don't want. So if you've got a radiator going in downstairs, run your central heating upstairs, see which pipes are getting hot, and then the two flow or the flow and return that is cold, that'll be the one that you want to tee off of. So on this job we're quite fortunate, we don't actually have any issues joining on to the existing pipework. Now after that, you want to make sure that your existing central heating system is actually capable of adding more heat emitters. So you can do this by carrying out a quick heat loss calculation. Now what you probably find is your boiler's oversized anyway, and it'll be perfectly fine. So this is a fairly new combi boiler that was installed by others. We just installed the pipework, and I know that this is going to be perfectly capable of adding an extra radiator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate the power to the boiler, get the central heating drain down by a drain off either on the flow and return, and empty out as much water as I possibly can out of the existing central heating system for me to make those T connections and run some new pipework to my new radiator location. Okay, I have got my new flow and return pipework loosely in from my radiator position all the way to my existing flow and return central heating pipework. Now this is the point where I'm going to be connecting on. I have identified the central heating flow and return, and as you can see it's 22mm in diameter, which is the best point to be joining onto the central heating system and adding a new radiator. If you are tapping onto a system that is smaller in diameter, 15mm, you want to make sure you follow that existing pipework. Make sure it's not already feeding two radiators, otherwise if you're adding a third or even a fourth, you will definitely have balancing and performance issues with that existing radiator. Now most central heating systems I would say are still copper in the UK, but a lot nowadays are going to be push fit plastic. Now when you're joining onto your existing central heating system, I would advise you to try and stick to the same material that it is currently plumbed in, but it is always going to be tempting to pick up some plastic push fit pipework and make your job a lot easier. So if you are doing that, I'd strongly advise that the materials you use, you stick to the same manufacturer, and you definitely make sure you use inserts on your plastic fittings. Now on this particular job, I'm actually using a brand called Butaline. Now this is a plastic system, but the fittings are crimp fit, so they're not actually pushed on and sealed, they're actually crimped on There's no rubbers, no O-rings, and this is a more professional way to install plastic pipework. So that's what I'm going to be using, but in most common households you're going to find you've got a copper flow and return, and it's perfectly fine if you're going to use a push fit T. But if you've got the capability, by all means run the whole pipework in copper and make a better job of it. Right, this is the radiator that we are going to be installing and piping up today. It's a designer flat panel radiator. I believe this one's from Victorian Plumbing, but usually if you buy them from eBay or Amazon, they actually are all exactly the same. So this particular radiator is hung on these hook style brackets, and it comes with our bleed plugs, blanking cap and some fixings. Now the customer wants this style of look like we've done on this radiator previously, so the pipework goes straight into the wall, keeps it very minimalistic, nice and neat. Now for us to get this desired look, we need to get our pipe centers correct. So to be able to achieve this, the best thing to do is actually have the radiator on site. So if you was only first fixing it, you would want to get the full specifications of the radiator and the radiator valves, but it always pays to have the radiator and valves on site. So for this particular job, we're going to be using corner radiator valves. Now that will allow us to run the pipework directly back into the wall. So it's quite misleading if you're not sure what you're doing with radiator valves. You usually have straight or angled, but what you actually need is a corner radiator valve set. So you can see here the pipe's going to go directly in the wall, but the control is actually vertical on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind the tails in to this radiator, put the valves on, and then I can measure the distance between the two to get my copper pipe centers. Okay, I've now got my radiator valves attached to the radiator itself, and I've just put in some copper tails. So at this stage what you want to do is just pinch the radiator valves up, just hand tight, just so they're not moving around too freely. But a little bit of advice I would give you is regarding the radiator tails themselves, that chrome section there, only wind them in 3/4 of the way. Now the reason for that is when you're installing radiator tails into the wall, sometimes when a plasterer has been in after you, they might accidentally nudge them over a few mil, and by doing this it will allow you a bit of leeway, so you'll be able to wind them in and out using your PTFE or Loctite, just to give you a bit of movement, just to make sure these pipes stay totally aligned. So now that I've got these tails in, what I'm going to do is put my tape measure end to end on this, and that will give me my pipe centers. So literally just put my tape on the end here, measure it to this end here, and then that will give me the correct pipe centers. And you cannot beat having a radiator and valves on site. It's perfectly fine at first fix stage to work off manufacturer's instructions or technical specifications, but in my experience they're not always correct. So back to the new radiator location. I've marked a centre line where the client wants the radiator to be hung between the ends of these two walls here, and I've also wrote down my pipe centres on the wall. Now what I want to do is divide my pipe centres by 2 and then measure out either side of this centre line, and that's going to give us the location of the pipes that need to be located into the wall and give us the correct pipe centres. Okay, that is one of my pipe centres marked up. So the line in the middle is the distance, and then the lines either side are the gap that I'm going to be chasing out. So on this occasion I won't be using the chasing tool. I'm only going up to about 200 millimeters height. So the reason for that height is it's above the skirting, and also there's plenty of room to put a shroud on. So you want to be careful. You don't want to put them so low that it's going to be hitting the skirting, or too tight there, it looks a bit silly. But also you don't want to rad too high, so make sure you get your measurements correct for that. So like I say, I'm just going to break out this bottom section here of this pipe centre, and also the same over on this side. Once that's done, I can then begin to put my pipes in. So the depth that I'm going to be trying to aim for is between 30 and 40 mil. That gives enough depth for me to tape the copper pipework that I'm going to be using to protect it, but also for the plasterer to get enough filler over the top to hold it in position and so that the plaster doesn't also break apart because it's so thin. Okay, back to the radiator. Now I've chased the walls out, I need to get this radiator hung in location, and that will aid me in installing the pipework into the walls. Now, first thing that I need to do is work out my bracket location. Now, normally on designer radiators, you will have columns that run along horizontal. You can just about make that out in between the flat panels. And what I need to do is measure the distance center to center from that column there to that top column there, and that will give me the distance vertically my brackets need to be apart. Now, once I've done that, I will need to work out my bottom bracket height. So I need my pipe centers to be roughly 200 mil to get my desired location above the skirting, but not too high. So what I'm doing is, on the end of this radiator, the column's slightly protruding. I'm going to put my first bracket on, and then from this point here I can see what the distance is from my pipe center to the top of this bracket. Now, on this particular radiator, this is pretty much bang on center, so I know that the top of this bracket here needs to be on my 200 mil line. Now obviously we don't want our brackets right on the end of the radiator, so we want to move them in a panel. So depending on how wide your radiator is, you might want to move it in two. This is fairly small. So I'm going to put them one in on either side. Now what I need to do is measure the distance between here and here, and then center that from the middle of the radiator. Now you need to be careful when you do this. Don't center it from the middle panel. You need to take this measurement and center it from your center line, and that will get you your pipework location in the correct place. Otherwise you might find that you've ended up moving the rad over slightly. So yeah, let's get this marked up on the wall and get these brackets located. Okay, I've got my brackets in location. Now I did actually have to move them over to the second flat panel just because we've got some old barrel pipework in the wall. Now these walls have been a little bit of a nightmare to fix onto. They're hollow blocks. So what I was finding was with the bottom brackets, when I was drilling through both holes on these fixing points, the hole was actually just deteriorating and just turning into one big hole. So for the top two brackets, what I've done is I've only drilled the top hole, and I've just added some grab adhesive just to stop it from spinning. Now ideally you want to make sure you get two fixings in that, but obviously we can't help the construction of the walls. So at this point now, I want to make sure I put any plastic washers on these hooks here. So usually they come with clear plastic or white, and then I can put my radiator in location, make sure it's all level, and begin to start piping it up. Okay, that is the radiator now on the wall. So another method you could use to get your vertical distances correct between your brackets is actually just put your tape measure on the end here, roll it down, and then measure to the end of that column. So it's actually quite a bit easier on the side. Right, so I'm at the point where I'm going to start piping up this radiator. Now I'm actually going to be using copper in the chases. It's a lot easier to work with because it's rigid. The radius of the fittings are a lot smaller than any plastic, so plastic fittings can be quite bulky. If I was to use one of those in the wall, chances are it would be sticking out into the room, and I can't pull a bend on a copper pipe bender because the curvature again would also be protruding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape this up, which I've already pre-prepared. I'll put a slight bend on it just to get past that brickwork down there, and then I'll cut it at the correct length, place it into the valve temporarily for now, and then I can transition from the copper to my butylene pipework, and then that'll be good and ready to be tested. Okay, so I've got the central heating all full up now. I have pre-piped the radiator valve with the radiator in location. Once I'm happy with the position, I have backfilled the chase with a bit of expanding foam just to hold the pipework nice and secure while the radiator is removed and decoration takes place. And I can now test all the pipework that I've just installed by capping these tails. So I know that when I return, everything is going to be in the correct location. Now, one thing the plasterer might not be happy about is I always leave my radiator brackets on the wall. Now the reason I do that is just so the second fix is nice and simple. I can just drop the rad back on. Now this wall is only getting a skim by the looks of it, so there's a little bit of filling to do, but other than that it's probably only getting a couple of mil skim, so it should be totally fine for the plasterer to leave those brackets on. Sometimes what you'll find is the plasterer will remove all the brackets just to make it more simple for them. You'll come back and you can't see any of your washers, any of your screws, and it can be a bit of a pain. So leave the brackets on the wall, in my opinion, as a plumber. Worst case scenario, take the brackets off but just leave the screws sticking out the plugs, but again it gives the plasterer the same issue, but can't have it easy all the time. So anyway, that's how I install my designer radiators. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and hopefully catch you on the next one.